So today's lecture is going to be on effective style and delivery. Now, before you watch this, I would recommend that you watch the TED Talk on memory. So that will be covering the canon of memory. I'm actually going to be having questions in the homework that will specifically address both this lecture and that one. So you might want to watch this first and then come back. Alright, so as far as delivery, I actually find this to be one of the most difficult things to teach. Not because delivery in and of itself is very difficult, but for the most part you know what bad delivery looks like. So, for instance,
I hated when people throw their books on the floor. It's really annoying and loud, and I don't like it. And it's not cool. And it's reckless.
most people will recognize that this is a bad speech, and that's why I say delivery is hard to teach, because most people actually know what good delivery is and what bad delivery is. It's probably easy to recognize that he didn't have eye contact, he had terrible tone variation, and his energy wasn't good, along with a lot of other factors. So when we talk about delivery, I'm going to give you tips on issues that you want to be aware of and some of the most important things with delivery, but a lot of this is going to be something that you already naturally do when you're having a conversation. And the goal of delivery is really to kind of replicate that conversation. As you become more comfortable, that will be easier. And for some people, this is just going to be easier. Some people are naturally better speakers, while others aren't. So remember, this will be progress throughout the semester. That's what the focus is. Now, the first thing that you really should have is confidence. And this might sound odd because I just mentioned that this is tough to do. I know you're nervous, and a lot of you might be thinking, I am scared to death of giving this speech. I don't really care about confidence. I just care about getting through it. However, what you should do is fake it till you make it. And this is not just something that Amy Cuddy has said really works, but research in general has proven that students who do this, not just in the context of speeches, but in a lot of different areas, really can change their attitude and the way they look at things and actually do better. So while you might not feel confident, it's really important that you try and act as confident as possible. One thing that will help you with that is practicing your speech. I know I've said this before, but you have 24 hours to submit your outline before you actually have to present it, so you have no excuse not to practice. The more you practice, the more confident you will feel, the more you'll be familiar with your material, and the less likely you will be to mess up. All of these things will help. Another thing, don't bring attention to your faults. So like I mentioned when we were talking about the fear of public speaking, if you bring attention to them, that's when they become really obvious to the audience. So don't comment on your own performance. If you make a mistake, pause, take a breath, keep going. And self-deprecating comments, especially right before a speech, are a pet peeve of mine. So if you come up and you say, well, here goes nothing, or this speech is going to be terrible, well then why are you going up to give this speech? And in some ways it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say you're going to do poorly, most likely you will. One other thing too that will help with confidence is the relaxation techniques we talked about a couple of classes ago. So whether it's visualization or diaphragmatic breathing, watching something humorous before your speech, exercising, or doing a power pose, do something that will help you calm you down, right? It may not give you confidence, but it will help you feel a little bit better. Another thing is vocal tone. So like we saw in the previous speech, there was not a lot of vocal tone. Now most people think of tone variation as the important thing, but one other thing that's important is your emotional tone. It's really important that you sound authentic. So if you're talking about something that's sad, express that. If it's something that is more happy and exciting, express that. So I'm going to go back to Amy Cuddy as an example, right? In her speech, when she was talking about something that was deeply emotional and very vulnerable for her, she expressed that in the way that she was talking. So again, kind of going back to that analogy of a speech being like a conversation, that's really what you want it to be. So make sure, just like in a conversation, if you're talking about something that makes you angry, right, your voice is going to change. You're going to sound angry. So make sure you're doing that, because many times I've had students who are talking about something serious like say AIDS or kidnapping, and their vocal tone just didn't match, right? The emotions were disconnected from the content of their speech, and it became very distracting for the audience. So be careful about that. And then, of course, your actual vocal tone, which is important that you put emphasis on important points. So it's not just that you're varying your tone, but like you'll even hear in my voice and a lot of different speakers, because we all sort of naturally do this, is that, you know, when you want to put emphasis on something like you just heard right now, I'll do that, and then other times I may not vary my tone as much. If you're someone who maybe struggles with that, if you just find that you're more monotone because that's the way you talk, this is something that you can try and do. What you want to do is put emphasis on the one that's bold. So the first one would be I was born in Houston. The second one, I was born in Houston. And then the third one, I was born in Houston. It might seem a little bit silly, but it really does help practice with sort of your vocal tone on putting that emphasis if you normally don't have a lot of it when you naturally speak. Another thing that's really important is eye contact. Eye contact is obviously going to connect to confidence, because if you have eye contact, you seem like a more confident speaker, but it also really helps to make a connection with the audience, and the more you do that, the more your audience is going to be engaged in your material. Another really effective thing about having eye contact is that you're not reading off your outline or note cards, and this also is going to affect your tone variation. If you're not looking at your note cards or your outline as much, that's when you're going to see more conversational, right? You're going to have that natural vocal tone and that emotional tone. So a lot of these things connect to each other. Now, I know some people have very little public speaking experience. If you are going to use your note cards or outline a lot, that's okay, but make sure you're progressing. Those people who are more advanced need to make sure that they're looking at the audience a lot of the time. Now, one tip for eye contact that I notice even students who are more experienced sometimes miss: make sure you're gazing across the entire room. So a lot of times people will just focus on a couple of different people, or just a couple of different areas in the room, or one specific area. Sometimes students will even just stare at me the whole time, which then kind of makes you look like this guy. So don't do that. You don't want to be a creepy stare. Vary your eye contact. Another thing, body or your gesture, your posture, those sorts of things. It's kind of obvious, but just do what comes natural. There's not really any specific rules here. Whatever you feel comfortable with works. Now, one thing I would recommend, if you're comfortable, don't stand behind the podium. Most speakers don't, because it kind of cuts off your energy and your connection with the audience. Moving around can be very effective. Don't pace though, so you have to be careful about that. Now, if you're someone who is less comfortable and you want to use the podium, that's perfectly fine, but don't lean on it. That's one thing that I notice students have a tendency to do. So something like this or this. First off, it looks very unprofessional, but what's also really important, and this connects to your posture in general, if you're leaning over, right, that actually is going to affect your vocal cords and your entire chest, which is going to hurt your vocal projection. So you want to make sure that you have your shoulders back, right? Your chest is kind of out. The more you do that, the better you're going to be able to project and articulate. So that does connect to your delivery, and that to me would probably be the one rule. Besides doing what's natural, make sure you actually have good posture. All right, the last thing I'm going to be talking about is style. Now, we're not going to be talking about rhetorical style. That's something we'll get to in the persuasive speech, but we will be discussing oral and clear style. Now, these two styles really will help you make the speech more of a conversation. So style and delivery are really intimately connected, and that's what's most important, again, with the way you present yourself, the way you approach the speech, is that it's more like a conversation with a friend or someone you know. That's tough to do at first, but it's something you want to try and work on. All right, so as far as these two styles, I'll talk about what they are.
So, to start off with clear style, what we're looking for in the clear style is kind of obvious, right? You need to be clear. You need to have clarity in your speech, especially for the informative speech. That's particularly important. It's really important that you use very direct words, very short, simple phrases, using active rather than passive, so making sure that you're talking about, whatever you're doing as being something that's actually going on, and using the concrete rather than abstract, right? So things that your audience is already familiar with. So let me give you an example where this is not done.
Here at Rockwell Automation's world headquarters, research has been proceeding to develop a line of automation products that establishes new standards for quality, technological leadership, and operating excellence. With customer success as our primary focus, work has been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters. Such an instrument comprised of Dodge gears and bearings, Reliant electric motors, Allen Bradley control.
So I'm going to stop it there. Obviously, you could tell there was a lot of jargon, right? A lot of very technical things were said. It wasn't explained. It wasn't broken down. So at that point, so remember, that's why the clear style is so important. You really have to have clarity for your audience, and you want to keep in mind, right? Simple, short, direct, make it concrete rather than abstract. So what we're going to look at now is an example where clear style is actually used. So this is David Galileo's talk on underwater discoveries that are really, really interesting, very fascinating, and he could use a lot of very technical jargon because, of course, he is talking about things that are more scientific, that are newer discoveries. However, he doesn't. So let's watch a short clip of this.
Anyone that's had that lovely opportunity knows that for about 2.5 hours on the way down, it's a perfectly positively pitch black world. And we used to see the most mysterious animals out the window that you couldn't describe, these blinking lights, a world of bioluminescence like fireflies. Dr. Edith Witter, she's now at the Ocean Research and Conservation Association, was able to come up with a camera that could capture some of these incredible animals, and that's what you're seeing here on the screen. That's all bioluminescence, like I said, just like fireflies. There's a flying turkey underwater. I'm a geologist by training, but I love that. And you see, some of the bioluminescence they use to avoid being eaten, some they use to attract prey, but all of it, from an artistic point of view, is just positively amazing. And a lot of what goes on inside, there's a fish with glowing eyes, pulsating eyes.
So this talk is a really good example of that, right? Notice probably the only thing that he used that was technical language or jargon would be bioluminescence, but then right after he said it is similar to a firefly. So that was really effective in kind of breaking that down. He even, for instance, talked about a fish, and he said, you know, a fish with eyes that glow. He didn't give us the name of the fish because that's really not necessary. So when we're talking about clear style, it's important to remember, what does the audience actually need to know, and how can I best break this down so that they're getting all the information effectively? The next style we need to talk about is the oral style. Now this is similar to clear style, however, what it's really asking is that you seem more conversational. So while clear style wants to make sure that you are clarifying and keeping things basic, the oral style is really working on making sure it seems like you're having a conversation with the audience. So you may notice, right, short familiar words, that's also what the clear style asks, but using things like personal pronouns, I, you, me, right, connecting to the audience, so we have seen, you know, you may have known this. Contractions or colloquial expressions, so colloquial expressions are things that we would say in conversation, like something like, what's up, right? Or contractions, instead of saying do not, you'd say don't, which is typically what we say when we're just naturally speaking. So the oral style is really about using this way of speaking so that it doesn't seem like you're reading off a manuscript, that it just seems like you're having a conversation with every single person in the audience. Now let's look at an example where this doesn't happen and talk about why that's ineffective.
And I'm going to be talking about the different areas in the marketing industry. So the first area that I want to talk about is the direct marketer, which is like a position usually in a company such as Sony or Nike. For example, they'll have like a product manager who wants to create a concept of the product that they're trying to sell. Usually, however, the product manager won't be able to create the concept completely by themselves, so they usually have to outsource to an advertising agency, and then the advertising agency comes up with the actual concepts for the
So this speech was definitely not as effective. Obviously, she was reading a lot. It didn't sound like she was speaking with the audience. She was kind of going all over the place. So this was really not an effective example of using oral style. What we're going to now transition to is an example of a speech that is using the oral style effectively.
Kind of fun, kind of crazy. So basically, I'm going to start today with these three pictures right behind me. Now, can anybody throw out a guess, random guess as to what these three images might have in common that maybe hasn't heard this speech before? Anyone?
They'll die.
Very good. That's nobody's got that yet. Yes. Basically, you're probably wondering why the jellyfish is up there, because most people really don't know that this jellyfish, which is actually called Turritopsis nutricula, has been able to scientifically defy natural death, which is something science has never really come in contact before.
So in this particular speech, you really notice she seemed a lot more familiar with the topic. Obviously, she's not using note cards or an outline. So one of the things you really want to try and do is move away from just reading off of it like we saw in the first example. I'm not expecting you guys to look exactly like this when you present your first speech. This is a much more professional example. But what you'll notice was she was sort of following a script, right? You could tell she probably had planned this out to a certain degree, but a lot of it was just her conversing. She sounded natural. And that's really what's ideal in the oral style.
So, these are the two styles that you want to try and replicate. Start thinking about how you can actually put that into your outline. So, homework. These are a couple of questions you need to answer. So this is from the TED Talk, right? What surprising thing happened? And then also name one of the techniques that he talked about in regards to memory. As far as this video, what is the difference between oral and clear style? What will hurt your vocal projection? And this is the most important one, rough outlines are due. So next class is going to be the last class that we meet before we start the informative speeches. So I need you to bring something in. It does have to be typed, but it doesn't have to be printed. So you'd have to bring a laptop so you have a digital copy. And you have to have all of your sources finished. And you must have your introduction and 2 body points. Alright, and on a side note, I just want to say you may have noticed in one of the video clips I used, Joan Rivers was in it. I started recording this literally probably 2 hours before she died and then realized and saw the news. So I just want to say no disrespect to Joan Rivers as far as that. And we are going to have rough outlines. We're going to be critiquing them, and we also will be looking at example speeches. So we're going to be grading them. I'll show you my grading rubric, and we'll grade them together so you can get a clear idea of what I'm looking for. So that is homework and the questions as far as style and delivery, and make sure if you haven't already done so to answer those first 2 questions, you're going to need to watch that TED Talk on memory.